Hi, everybody. It's Don Crowther. So many of us go through life working so hard all the time on doing things right. Yet so often we never really ask ourselves the question, am I doing the right things? And here's the cool thing. When you start doing the right things, it's so much easier to do those things correctly. So yesterday, I told you about high jumping. I'm going to tell you another track story here for a minute. 7th grade, I'm in junior high school. I go out for the track team. I've always been pretty fast, did a lot of running and everything in grade school. And so I said, hey, this totally makes sense. So I went out for the track team. And you know what? Those shorter races, they looked pretty cool because you get done with them real quick and you don't get all that tired. And so I did the 100-yard dash, the 220, the 440. All right. Here's the problem. I didn't do them very well. I had this problem that when the gun went off, I came out of the block, stood straight up and started running. And the problem was I actually ran the race just as fast or a little faster than everybody else, but I lost like a second getting out of the blocks. And by the time I got out of the blocks, everybody was 3 or 4 steps ahead of me and I just couldn't ever catch up with them. And I struggled with that. The coach actually put a rope started 5 feet from the takeoff line, then like 6 feet out, and it was like 5 feet high in the ground and above the ground. And then it went down to, when it was like 10 feet out, it was still 5 feet off the ground. And so what would happen is if I popped up and ran into it, is like I'd hit it right in my throat and down on the ground I'd go. And so he was trying to teach me to stay down and drive through it, but I never quite figured out how to do it. And I got floored by the rope a whole bunch of times. Well, at the time I had a friend, his name was Jamie Nails. And Jamie, I'd love to connect with you if you ever hear this. Jamie was an American Indian child who came and lived 2 doors down the street from me. Back in those days, they used to take Indians from the reservations and bring them and put them as basically foster children in people's homes for the school year. Then they'd go back home during the summertime. And that's what he was doing. And turns out Jamie and I became really good friends. And Jamie was a runner. One time I asked him, how did you get so good at this? And he told me that there was a tree 5 miles from his house. And he would run to that tree every day, like 1 or 2 or 3 times, just because it was something to do. And I said, well, what about all the other trees? Why was this one so special? He says, Don, you didn't get it. There was a tree 5 miles from my house. And so apparently there weren't a lot of trees in that particular area. But what would happen is we'd get up, and I've told the story about running up to the bee on the mountain and putting chalk on your pants in the morning. And then we'd go into track practice in the after school, and we'd come home and do our homework. And then I'd get a phone call from Jamie and say, hey, let's go running. And it's like, Jamie, are you nuts? We've already been running like hours today. What are you talking about? And he'd say, Don, let's go running. And so Jamie and I would go up, and we'd go up into the mountains above my house, and we would run those mountains back and forth for an hour, 2 hours a night. I don't know, 2, 3, 4 times a week. And what ended up happening was I was putting in, I don't know, maybe 5 miles in track practice a day, 5 to 8 miles by the time we went up to the bee. But then I'd go out and put in another 5 to 8 miles with Jamie running at night. And what became pretty clear pretty quickly was I wasn't a sprinter. I was a distance guy. So the next year, when I came back, I started running distance instead. Now, Jamie was amazing. I once saw him on so at the time in 7th grade, the longest race they would let you run is a 13:20, so 3 laps around the track. I once saw him lap 3 or 4 people running 3 times around the track. That's how fast Jamie was. And so when Jamie and I were running up in the hills, he was forcing me to keep up with him at his pace. And it turned me into a distance guy. And I became a miler. And the mile is the world's greatest race. There is none better. It is just short enough that you don't die at the end of it, but it's long enough that you can do strategy and do it really, really well. The interesting thing was I became pretty good at the mile. And sometime I'll tell you some stories about running the mile. That's a whole separate story. The interesting thing is this. The last race that I ran, so they're what are called split times, where when you're running a mile, every time you come around the track, they click the stopwatch again, and they keep track of how long it took you to run that lap. And the last lap of the last race that I ever ran competitively in the mile, I unofficially, because they don't give a word for this, broke the record for the fastest last lap. So a 4:40 one time around the track, I broke that record. And it was the last lap of a mile. And the reason why I say this, and this is the junior high school record, it's not a big deal, okay? But the important thing is this. I'd spent a whole year trying to figure out how to run the 440 and the 220 and the 100 right. Where once I started running the right race for me, I actually was able to run that 440 better than I'd ever run it while I was working on it every single day, and that's all that I did. So my question for you is this. Are you doing the right thing? Are you doing that thing that you're here on the earth to do? And the bigger question than that is, how can you do that thing that you're here on the earth to do? Now, some of you, that thing that you're here on the earth to do is something that doesn't necessarily translate directly into like putting food on the table or something like that. So for some of us, we have to figure out a way to make that thing become something that we can do profitably. But I now work with people who help people sew vintage clothing. They help people knit, those kinds of things. So it is still possible to take something that you're really good at, that traditionally will never put food on the table, never make you enough money to be able to do that. And now, especially with the online world and the ability to teach things online, you can actually take things that formerly you could never make any money and actually make a very good living helping other people do that thing. So again, the question, what is the thing that you were put on the earth to do? And how can you do that for your life? This is Don Crowther saying, just go do this stuff.